All right, so what we're going to talk about is how to do updates. Last week we talked about how to insert new records, how to delete records, how to read the records that are in the database, and now we just have one thing left to cover, and that is updates. So we're going to take a look at update scripts, and the files that you guys downloaded last week have the update scripts in them. Those zipped files do. So what we're going to look at is the change script that's in the address book. There's also a change script that's in the discussion forum, and that's in the zip file that you guys downloaded. And these files don't exist in the book. I actually had to create them. And doing a change is a little more challenging, especially with the address book, just because the only thing that was required was their name. The address is optional, the telephone is optional, fax was optional, notes were optional, so you don't really know if they're filled in or not. So that made this even more challenging because then you don't know if you need to insert a new record or if you need to update an existing one. So I do have a workaround for that, and I'll explain how all of it works. So with updates, we do have a change entry form that once it is submitted goes to a change script. So there's two files in the process, just like we had two files with the add and two files with the delete. For the change entry, it's kind of a combination of the select entry and the add entry, because at the top, they're going to select the person that they want to change, just like the select entry selected the person they wanted to view. So that selection code was copied from the select entry into this change file. And then the rest was kind of copied from the add entry. So basically what the change entry does is they have to select a user, and then it fills in the information for that particular person. So it's going to fill in their name, first name and last name, and then it'll fill in their address if the address exists. It'll fill in the phone number if that exists, and so on. That way, if they want to change or maybe they want to add something new, they can do that. You'll notice at the top of the script, I do a session start because the way that we are going to indicate to the change script whether something existed or it's new is through session variables. So we have to start the session first thing, and then we include the connection script. And then do database does the actual connection. And then this first section will display if they have not posted. So if they haven't submitted, that means they have to select a person to change. So they're going to then display the drop-down list. So this is identical to what we did in select entry. The difference or the differences I've actually highlighted in yellow. So instead of saying select an entry to view, we've got select an entry to update. Okay, I changed the ID and the name attributes. And then I also changed the description to select a record to update. And then I changed the button. That's all that changed. Everything else is pretty much a straight copy from the select entry. Okay, and so since we've already talked about that, I wasn't going to go through it again, but you can actually see here that this is your HTML. And then we've got the first option that says select one. And then for each name that displays in the drop-down list, we're actually looping through the rows that were retrieved from the database. Okay, and up here's the select for the database. Here's where we send it and retrieve the rows. Here's where we make sure that we have rows, okay, and so on. Once they select a person and they submit, then it's going to come down and execute through this else section. Okay, so the first section up here was if it didn't post. Okay, and otherwise, if it did post, then we need to make sure that we have an ID. Because if there is no ID to change, that means something went wrong and they have to do another selection. Then this is where we get into saving our session variables. So the ID that we retrieve up here is the primary key for the master name table. That primary key is the foreign key in all of the other tables. And so we do save that ID, and then we refer to that down here and store it as a session variable. Okay, because that ID is super important. That is how we are going to connect all of the other tables to the master name table. Okay, and then you'll notice that I've got address, telephone, email, fax, and notes. These are all of our other tables. And we're setting them all to true. And that is just kind of a starting value. So true means that there is data there. Now, we actually have to read all of those tables to see if there's data and display it in the form if it's there. So as we are processing this change entry script, we are going to know if there's data in address, telephone, email, and all of that. If there's not data there, we're going to change true to false. Okay, but we had to initialize it to a value to start with. So here we are selecting the first name and the last name from the master name. Here we're looking for the ID. We know that there has to be data here because first name and last name are required. Okay, and so we're sending the query, we're cleaning up the information, and then we're displaying it. So here we've got record update, here we've got our form tag, and then you can see we're using the value attribute to display the value, the clean value that we retrieved from the database. And the thing that people mess up, as I mentioned last week, is this single quote, double quote business. So you'll notice that the display block itself always starts with double quotes and it ends with double quotes. So in a case like this, what we've got is a single quote, and then inside the single quote, we have the double quote. And so that is because the name has to have double quotes around it. And then we have the period, which is the concatenator. So we're concatenating on the double quotes before the name and after the name. Okay, so we're doing that for first and last name. Then we free up the result, and we know these are going to be filled in. So we don't even have to check to see if there's something there. We're just displaying it. You'll notice that I do issue a little warning here about the single quote, double quote issue. Another thing people often forget is the period for the concatenator. That is the #1 thing that people mess up in these scripts. Let's see. So master name table is pretty straightforward because we know the data is going to be there. For the address table and all of the other ones, we do not know if it's filled in or not. And there can be multiple addresses, multiple phone numbers. There can be more than one if they are filled in. So here we've got our little select address, city, state, zip type from address where the master ID, which is the foreign key, is equal to the safe ID. Okay, and the safe ID was the primary key in the master name table. And so we set up our SQL statement. Here we are querying the database. We're sending it the connection string, and we're sending it our SQL statement. And then we're checking to see if the address is there. Okay, so here's the result, whatever that may be. And then we have an if statement where we're checking the number of rows. So in this result set, okay, are the number of rows greater than 0? If it is, then we have an address. Okay, and if it's not, then there is nothing to display in that address section. Okay, so we're going to go through the code for if the address is there, and then we're going to go through the code for if the address is not there. So if the address is there, then we're going to give it a little heading of addresses. We need to do a loop, and basically the loop is going to kind of convert what's in the get address result into an associative array, store it in add info, and then you can see we're subscripting in to add info to get the address, the city, the state, and the zip code. And we are running it through strip slashes to clean it up. And then we're looking at the address type. And we're then displaying everything. Address type is a checkbox. And the checkbox can take on one of, or I think it's an option button, radio button. And it can take on one of 3 values. It can either be home work, or I think other was the third option. So displaying the address, city, state, and zip is pretty straightforward because we're using the value attribute for all 3 of those. But when we get to address type, we need to know if it's the home address, if it's the work address, and if it's not home or work, it's the other address. And so we have to still display all 3 of those option or radio buttons, and the one that represents the address, we have to say checked equals checked, okay, because that puts the little circle in the radio button. So if the address type is home, if the value was home, then that's the one that needs to be checked, and the other 2 still have to display. If the address type is worked, then that's the one that needs to be checked, and they all 3 still need to be displayed. Okay, and otherwise, if it's not home or work, we're going to assume that it's other, and then that one is the one that needs to be checked. Okay, and then you'll see that we add the closing field set at the end here, and that's pretty much what we do if the address is there. Now, if the address is not there, we have to set our session variable to false. And then we basically have to display an empty form. And because we don't have to insert any PHP data in here, it's just going to be straight HTML, we can actually use the here doc. So we can do the end of block, and then between that, this is just straight HTML for displaying those form entry areas for the address. Okay, and then at the very bottom, we are freeing up those address resources. And what we just did for address is what we have to do for all of the remaining tables. And so those are all in here. And let's see. Okay, so here's the telephone. So you'll see that it's very much the same as address. We're selecting the telephone number where the master ID is equal to the safe ID. We do the MySQLi query, we send it the connection string, we send it our query, we store the result, we check to see if the number of rows in the result set is greater than 0, because that means the phone number is there. Okay, if it is there, then we display a little heading. We convert the results into an associative array, and we retrieve the phone number. This also has type. And so then that same kind of code that we used for address as far as type goes, we also have to use for phone number. Okay, so we have to know if it's home, work, or other. So all of this code is pretty much identical to what we did up in address. Okay, we're just dealing with the telephone number instead. Okay, so that's all what it does if it's true. And then if it's false, just like address, we set the session variable to false. And then we do the here doc to display that section of the form so they can fill it in if they want to. Okay, and you'll see that the fax is the same, and so is the note section, because they may or may not be filled in. So do you guys have any questions about the change entry?
No, I think I got it.
Okay. So once they fill that out and they submit it, it's going to go to change.php, and this is the one that actually updates the database tables. Coding this was a little bit tricky because the only thing required was the first and the last name. So I actually had to think about this for a while to figure out how I was going to get the two to figure out what stuff should be inserted and what stuff should be updated. The session variables actually work great for this. So because this one is also using session variables, we have session start right up at the top. And then we've got our include. And so at this point, we're going to check to see if the first and last name are filled in. Those are required. If for some reason they're not filled in, we just redirect them back to change entry. Okay, and then after we verify that the data has been posted, we do the little connection to the database. And then we take our session ID and we store it as master ID. And then we basically retrieve all the different variables or columns from the post array, and we clean them up, and then we store them. So this is all of the data that they could have filled in. So these may or may not have values in them. We're just retrieving whatever's there, cleaning it up, storing it. Okay, and then we just go ahead and we assume that if there's data there, we're going to do updates. So for the master name table, which always has data in it, whether they change the name or not, we just go ahead and update it. So you can see that we've got update master name, set, date added, date modified, first name, and last name. Okay, so we have the set statement and then the equivalence operator. So we're putting values into the different columns, and then we're saying where ID equals master ID. send it to the database to do the update. So for this one, we can automatically do the update. For the other ones, we cannot because we don't know if data existed or if the data is new. So that's where we have to check the session variables. So for address, we are checking to see if the session variable is true. Because if it's true, that means that data was there. Okay, and so we just go ahead and do an update. If it's false, that means there wasn't data there. And if there is something in address, city, state, or zip, we need to insert a new row. Okay, so if we need to insert a row, we have to use insert into. And if the data was already there, then we have to do an update. Okay, and it's all based on what's in the session variable. So if the session variable is true, we're going to do this update. If the session variable is false and there's data there, then we do an insert. Okay, so all of the tables except for master name are done this way, where we have to check the session variable. If it's true, we just automatically do the update. Okay, otherwise, if there's data there, we do an insert. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Yes, no? Okay. Okay. So this script shows you the code for everything. So here's the address stuff that we just looked at. Okay. And then right below that, you can see this is the code for telephone. And it's basically the same thing. We check that session variable. So if it's true, that means there was a telephone number there. And so then we just assume that it needs to be updated. Okay. And then otherwise, if it's false, initially there wasn't a telephone. So we check to see if there's a number there now. And if there is, then we do an insert. Okay. And we do the same thing with fax, the same thing with email, the same thing with notes. Right? So that's pretty much how the change works. And you almost have to use the session variables if you are dealing with related tables that are not required, because there's no other way that you're going to be able to tell the change or the update script whether the data was initially there or not, unless you have some kind of a session variable. So that is the last little piece that I needed to show you. And what you guys are going to be working on then, this is an assignment, but it's also you're double dipping for your final project. You're going to be adding that update script to your project that you're working on. Okay, so your lab assignment is to create an update script for your tables. Okay, and then once you've got everything working, okay, you are going to need to submit the SQL code for your tables so that I can create that for you. And remember, the name of your database is your username. So that's what you're going to be adding tables to. And I did show you guys that, and I can actually show it to you again. Oh, let's see. Okay, so see all of these Lisa Ballback prefixes with your usernames? Okay, that is going to be your database. Okay, and this is what we're going to be adding the tables to. So when you send me your scripts, what I'm going to do is I'll just select your database, come in here, paste your scripts to create your tables, hit go, and then your tables will be there. Okay, and then when you connect, when you have to tell it the name of the, where you're connecting to, this is going to be the database. Okay, so hopefully that'll make sense to you. Okay, so just like we would connect to Lisa Ballback _ grocery, here you would have to use your username. Okay, so once you have the scripts and you want to, you're ready to put it on the production server, you can just email those to me and I will run them. Okay, and then you'll transfer all your pages to the server and then add the project to the menu. And then we should be able to run it live. So the scripts, because that will complete all of the CRUD operations, the scripts are not due until after spring break. Okay, so final project instructions. This basically covers everything that's going to have to be in your final project. And this was the address menu that you guys downloaded. So at this point, you'd be able to do the add, the change, the delete, and select a record. That's what we've covered so far. Those are the CRUD operations. Okay, and we just covered change today. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Okay, so I'm gonna stop the video and you guys can go ahead and start working on this. And if you are done with your database and you want me to put it on the server, just let me know. And if you email that stuff to me, I can do it right now while you're watching. Okay. So I am stopping the recording.